how can we further the conversation and the communication about understanding, the consequences and the meaning of what we consume and what we use?
As experts in this field, should we think about commodifying the message of sustainability and translating it in the ways that we know are viable to urban markets in order to have that message or those messages be more consumable? We certainly know how to do that. We've spent our whole careers doing that.
Here's what you can do by, for instance, changing the washer on your sink so that it doesn't drip anymore. This will save you X number of dollars a month and a year. And oh, by the way, you'll use less water. Here's what you can do in the chemicals you use to clean the house. Rather than go out and get that bottle of 409, if you get this cheaper and, oh, by the way, much more environmentally friendly product, you'll save money, and, oh, by the way, some other things are happening.
Being a consumer is about self. It's the century of the self. And that's because of marketing, advertising, again, creating these particular postmodern narratives connected to how we consume objects. And so, as a professor of design, what I try to do is to instill in the students the fact that they're citizens first and designers second. They're citizens first who are engaged in communication, who just happen to be designers.
The truth is that in our communities, the spaces and places where we've been able to generate community are public spaces, places and spaces that belong to all of us. The park in the neighborhood, where everybody could get together and, be creative. These places and spaces are in fact disappearing all around us for exactly what we're talking about, this privatization and this, consumer identity where, our country, in fact, is becoming so much more privatized that we see the disappearance of public libraries, we see the disappearance of public parks and spaces. And so for those of us who don't have resources, not us, necessarily on the panel, but the communities that we come from, these public democratizing spaces and places are super important. And we're losing those. And I think that one of the things that's important about sustainable businesses is that I see companies like the companies that you all represent setting aside money for nonprofits and foundations that do things for the public good and holding a space in our country for the public to gather without having to have money to pay a price of entry. These things are really important in kind of this reframing, and we have really moved very, very far away from kind of the public collective good. And this is a really fundamental underpinning of the way in which people frame their lives.
This was our latest green issue with Beyonce on the cover. And the stories here, I mean, you can see, the green issue, 11 green jobs and how to get paid. Plus our favorite green things, where you had some of the others talking about what we do personally. And then even in the article, Beyonce talked a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit about some of the things she does. But using, use the tools, whether it's through aspirational issues or celebrity, to get people's attention. To, as Mr. Johnson used to say, you have to use, sometimes you gotta do stuff like this in order to feed people information they need to know, as well as things they want to know. And so, using the tools you have to communicate and get the message out, and trying to frame it in a way that people can hear it.
So what is the next level of taking all these entrepreneurial efforts that we're all involved in, and getting more momentum or organizing them better so that we're getting to the scale level? I'm just wondering if anybody has some thoughts about that.
Okay, so I have to admit, I was a little bit confused at the start of this, because the last time I had a conversation where sustainability just meant reusing and recycling stuff was years ago. I understand that mass market media still thinks sustainability is about reducing carbon footprint and just that. But keeping people involved, keeping places involved, it's a bigger picture. And apparently those of us who are in the weeds, or maybe it's just me, or maybe I haven't had enough sleep, but aren't getting that part out to the folks in the mass media. Because to me, sustainability is clean water. It's keeping your kids healthy, right? It's not paying more for something that was manufactured by blind Tibetan nuns and whatever, right? Or even locally by, And so how do you get the broader message of nothing is wasted, no people, no place, no product?
Nothing is wasted.
And that, I mean, my favorite sustainability food company actually doesn't use, I think, any organics, although they'd love to, but they can't afford to, and it's a homeless shelter in DC. And they train the folks to do food service, you know where I'm going with this. And they had their kitchen space, they let farmers in the area use their industrial kitchen between midnight and 6 in the morning, and you know, nothing gets wasted. And it's people and it's process, it's not just stuff. And how do we move the conversation so that that's
So it's
part of the
holistic,
mass
yeah,
market?
yes,
So, you know,
right.
I think most of the people at this conference might get this, but clearly when you look at advertisements, you know, spread toward big companies, they don't get that's part of the piece.
I think we often feel like we're the people who get wasted and not used or used up. So, you know, I could be wrong, but this has, you know, been our historical experience in this country as disposable people, disposable labor, in fact. So,
Prisons,
I mean, that's why, that's how we got here. So, I think that that's really an important idea, if that is an emerging idea, but then where are people situated in that conversation? So, for example, you have, you know, the majority of people, you know, when we were living in the Bay Area, you know, so many people, middle-class people and upper-middle-class people taking their kids out of public school and leaving the rest behind, and therefore taking, you know, the tax base with them that supports those public schools. And so, you know, everybody wants their kids to have the best.
One of the many challenges we have is we'll have a session like this, and then when we go back to whatever we're normally doing, we haven't changed our narratives particularly.
Right.
I mean, people in the room, white, of color, whatever heritage we're at, take it in or move by it, but then we go back to the same narratives, and I think that's something
Why is that?
we're really struggling with. Well, my own feeling is because we're comfortable enough with the narratives we have.
We haven't
And
embraced.
that's struggle I've
Who are
had.
you speaking to? Who's your audience that you're speaking to? Other folks like you?
Other folks like me in the room. So
There you go.
SBN is primarily white.
So Jonathan, one thing that I think you can do with that is that there is a whole class and category of experts in all these different aspects of messaging and communication, business planning, business product development. You know, this is just a small sample in the room, but there are those experts, and bringing them on board to really help educate your business and to take, you know, to put it into practice within your company is what you could do.
How do we change our narratives within the community that then helps us have the foundation and the perspectives to go back and do that work? I don't have a company, but in our companies, organizations.
Right. Well, and I think one of the efforts that we're really working on at SBN is how to have more of these kinds of dialogues and to really get into the
So it
communication.
becomes our
that we do.
DNA.
Yeah.
It's our
And
DNA, it's not-
representation, people will represent themselves, right? So if you have the representation in the organization, people will represent their own interests, and then you don't have to worry about you having to articulate other people's experiences or points of view, because we'll be present in the room to articulate our own points of view.
The news meeting would be so different. I remember sitting at the San Jose Mercury News, having a conversation,
That's right.
and I'd either be the only black face there or one or two other black or brown faces, and someone would make a comment that made sense, and someone would lean over and say, yeah, true that. And I got what they were saying. Most other folks in the room had no clue what they were saying. I had the same conversation at Ebony magazine, and everyone gets it. It's the environment that you're around. Again, not a part of SVN, but I ran a very large organization, nonprofit organization, the National Association of Black Journalists, NABJ, the president of that. And you know, with 5,000 members, mainly 90% African American, the conversations there were very different than in an all-white environment. Now, they were plagued with the same issues about, are we talking to the choir? But it was a different choir.
I think it's really got to be a focus of all of ours at SVN. I've said this so many times, and I don't really know how anybody else in this organization lives. But I think we all have to, in our daily lives, in our neighborhoods, in the places we shop, in the friends that we make, in the people we invite over, in our community work, we all have to be living it. you know, what do we do in the black communities? What do we do in the white communities? That's not enough. I mean, we have to have a community where all people live together, where all people come to your home, where you hire all people. And it starts with who you have over, and who do you go to the movies with, and who do your kids play with, and where do you choose to buy your house. And I think that SVN, of all people, should be focused on having made that decision and really committing to it. Because if you don't have that kind of interaction, it's really hard to connect up here. You know, if you're connecting here, it's, you already know it.
Right.
A number of us in SDN have been working on this question of how to bring economic justice and sustainability together in the same vessel and be working together as much as we can. And my own personal experience is that there's been a lot of conversations and dialogue, which is very important. But the thing that I'm looking for the most is to find somewhere, someplace where we're locally drilling down and actually making something happen. You know, there's actually something happening in the community that is bringing together these issues of sustainability and economic justice. And of course, one way is when Van talked about green jobs. That's something that's happening, although still there's a lot of talk, and yet the action actually happening isn't yet happening at the level that I've seen, that I'd like to see. But the other thing is that I think that this sustainability and economic justice are going to be coming together whether we do anything or not in this room, personally. And it's just a question of how fast we make it happen. And I'd like to make it happen quicker because I'd like to save the planet. And I think that besides the missing link of actually having a program that actually does something, we need more bridges, bridges between these communities. Because with the group of us in Boston that are constantly looking to try to find some bridges into inner city communities to find ways to actually do something in the community that makes it happen. We found some, but we need more. And it works across both angles. But that's a key thing, is we need people who are willing to actually become a bridge, make it happen, and show some results that can be examples for the rest of the country to say, this is how they did it, this works. Because talking about it's one thing, but doing it is something else.
Right. Steve?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Steve Blessman, and I'd just like to follow up with what Lori said about there's been a committee that's worked on this. I think this seminar is a result of that actually today. It's been going on for years. When Patricia and I first came to our first meeting at Mohawk, my initial hit was that I was at an East Coast Jewish men's club. And that was exactly how SVN hit.
No problem with that?
No problem. and I grew up in a very
Some
small.
of my best friends are East Coast Jewish men.
And I think, of course, we all understand the progressive social history that created that has led to SVN. And I think that, and Patricia and I actually sat down with Ed, and I think at that time the only other African Americans that we knew in SVN were Ed, Julius, and Keith. Melissa at that point had not yet become a member, and I don't think there was anyone else in the room. And one of the discussions we've had, and Lori championed this IDEA committee, IDEA, which I can never remember what it stands for. I think the D's for diversity. But and Deb Nelson, I think, has to take a lot of credit as the executive director and as a co-executive director. She really gets it, and she has really emphasized this for this organization. And so it has changed. 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, we didn't have rooms that looked like this at all. We didn't have meetings that looked like this at all. And one of the problems we have with the IDEA committee is, on one hand, African Americans and other minority groups should not have to sit on diversity panels and boards to talk about how to diversify. Yet without that input, you got a bunch of white people sitting around talking about should we do. And so you have to find that balance, you know. And so it's kind of a push-pull thing. And I think what we have today is a result of that. Now, a point you had brought up earlier about bringing companies to scale. To me, that's the question that we're all looking at, whether we're with Dream Makers or if we're at Social Venture Network. How do you grow your company and retain your mission? Because once you take on equity, and if you go public, your mission's out the window, and it's all about shareholder return by law. And so that is the question. How do we grow these precious little jewels and not just get snapped up by a major for a rounding error to become their little boutique cute thing that they want to sell at the store? And so that's what we're all facing with, whether it's to be black owned, whether it's to be family owned, whether it's to be socially responsible. When you finally get there, how do you save the baby? You know? and that's what we're working on. But SVN has come around, and strangely enough, we are actually making a difference at the national level. We have input into the current administration. We have input in networks across the country. It's all green now. And I give Mary Ann so much credit. I mean, she's the one that got SVN into Black Enterprise. She's the one that got Bianca on the cover. I mean, you know, it's really happening. You know, it's really happening now. All of the major corporations have their green papers and everybody green this and all the greenwashing. And now we have to protect ourselves against everybody running to the door with the money to push us out of the way. The people who really believe it from the heart. You know, and so that's where we're at. And it's been very frustrating for us watching this very slow process and the pushback against race. I've heard insensitive things said at these meetings publicly by presenters, and half the crowd doesn't understand that it was actually insulting and inappropriate. They just don't get it. And why do folks have to make an issue of it? Well, because it is an issue, and we're going to have to teach you, and I'm sorry it's uncomfortable. And so I just really thank all of you for showing up and everybody who's put so much into this, because it's made a big difference. It really
Awesome.
has.
Thank you very much for that.
Well, I'll give way to the floor because it's been said, but, you know, one thing I will add, and maybe on a slightly up note, I've been involved with SVN for the past 3 years, and I am seeing the change. And one of the a lot of my clients are large corporations, and the audiences that I speak to in African American, Asian, Hispanic, LGBT audiences typically are the professionals and minority entrepreneurs because of the corporations who are trying to recruit for talent or tap those particulars. And one of the things that I've truly learned is that the only way that any kind of diversity is really going to effectively happen is they have to start from top down. Leadership has to get it. If leadership gets it, the rest will just happen. And one of the things that's happened at SVN, it is now part of the leadership. And I think that's why you're beginning to see it happen, and that's what Steve is alluding to. I noticed that in this particular conference, I have been reached out to by several members of SVN for one-on-one consult, specifically for the issue of diversity and inclusion, and that's very positive. So I'm just letting you know that I think it's happening.
Rather than having a diversity committee over here or a task force over here, but the real stuff that happens over there, as it promulgates into the centers of power, the goals, the values, the measurements of success, and the rewards, certainly in the corporate structure, when these issues become part of the bonus structure, it gets folks' attention. And it really does, for good or for bad. And so within this organization or others, the closer it gets to the centers of power, the more things get done.
And one of the things that we've noticed is, particularly in the philanthropic and civic sector, is that this industry is getting it and has gotten a very big pass on diversity. The top 3 to 4% of foundations and nonprofits actually control 75 to 80% of the dollars that flow through this industry. This is a $260 billion industry. And the point that's been made here, which is the boards, the CEOs of these organizations are actually the least diverse when you compare it to corporate even. 2 to 5% of the boards and CEOs in this industry are people of color. 70% of the people being served are people of color. 2 to 3% of the dollars actually go to organizations and that focus on minority-related issues. 2 to 3% of the $260 billion industry go specifically to organizations that focus on this issue. And the main issue around this is who's at the table making decisions about where these monies go, how they're used, right? And so part of what we do is really assist folks in thinking about diversity as an economic development strategy, right? Because if you have someone at the table who's asking, what's our supplier diversity policy? What's our workforce diversity policy? That then shapes all of the practices of the organization. That shapes the compensation of the executive director and the senior management team. But that, so translating that message, making sure that the policies actually play out in practice is more than a notion. And ensuring that there are the right folks who are at the table to at least push those issues and talk about that can actually have a tremendous impact on community development and a lot of the economic development issues we care about.
You make a tremendous point. It is on the boards of directors.
It's on the board of directors.
For-profit companies, of nonprofits, of foundations that make the decisions.
And think about it, the top folks on these nonprofit organizations and foundations are actually happen to be on corporate boards too, right? So if you're beginning to build those relationships in philanthropy, they translate very well to corporate America as well.
There are a lot of people that make, the politically correct rainforest chocolate bar and all that. And I struggle so much with the talk about aspiration, the issue of consumption and you saying, I don't wanna make things anymore. I make things, boys in China, God forbid. But I feel like I don't wanna make things either. And your point about, whoever said about reuse doesn't even enter the discourse. And the whole system of measurement, even in the Obama administration, what is it about? Growth, mass market, all that stuff. And I have no idea what to do about it.
Yep.
There was a group here 10 years ago or something called Redefining Progress.
Yep.
And their mission was, we gotta measure things differently.
Right.
That's it. That's kind of the fundamental thing.
What you measure matters.
What you
incredibly.
measure, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so, to me, that conversation is just so fundamental. And
It's
that's-
just beginning.
It's just beginning, and that's just another thing we have to be talking about here. Because it's the contradiction between, we're the little people, quote unquote, trying to make money and save money in a better way. But we're measured on growth. And a lot of the reason that companies have gotten, this whole thing about Stonyfield and everything else is, quote, fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders.
I also wanted to say thank you for this great discussion. And I would say that those of us that have been involved in the sustainability movement from the beginning have always defined sustainability as including social justice. And I think it's really, really important that when we use the term sustainability, it includes social justice. Don't let anybody separate out social justice from sustainability. That is a very serious mistake if we allow that to happen. Just like environmental sustainability is not separate. There's not another sustainability, there is sustainability. I think that's really critical. And I think that there are so many environmental justice issues that we don't necessarily talk about, and I wanted to ask more. I guess we don't have time now, but I wanted to ask, because you talked about money, saving money and other benefits, but there are other major environmental justice issues when people purchase a product. And I would love to hear, we don't have the time now, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about, can we speak to people of color about those issues? Dealing with asthma, or dealing with siting of power plants, or incinerators, or pesticide plants. Is that part of, money is important, but there are these other aspects that are affecting other people of color. And then the other thing I wanted to do is just return to the question that Heather asked, the larger question about having a larger shift towards sustainability. And this question that we've been trying to do at the Alliance for Sustainability is looking at, could there be a national campaign to be able to help do this?
This is a wonderful resource and community for us to really work together, really get on the same page with all of the amazing skills and resources we have, just in this room. And so I think that it's really important that we all figure out how we engage and support with each other. When I realized yesterday that Senator Carol Moseley Braun was creating a line of organic food, and yes, her political leadership has been one thing, and she is moving that vision and energy into a business area that's really important for the health, critical to the health of the African American community as well as the planet. And we need to help figure out how we support each other to build our businesses and to go out there and serve more people. So I just want to remind you, this is the beginning of the conversation and the work we get to do together.